Hello there, I do hope you're all well. Now I know I've already done a video with Nick Abbot yesterday, but when the story of Don Mussolini contracting foot and mouth, where he opened his mouth and shoved his foot in it, and basically tried to disenfranchise voters and delegitimise democracy, I had already finished and downloaded the video. Well, I was listening to his Sunday evening show, minus the soundboard and less of the sarcasm and generally more serious. And I was going to look up to see if James O'Brien was back on Monday and see if LBC's American correspondent Simon Marks would do an interview with him about Donald Trump's latest calamity. But James O'Brien ain't back until Tuesday, and I think by that time, I think this smoking gun might have passed by. So Nick Abbot had an interesting conversation with Simon Marks anyway on Sunday evening, practically when the story was breaking and the story was still quite fresh and all that. So don't worry, this isn't going to be a Nick Abbot loving, even though I enjoy his shows and all that. He's my cup of tea, not everybody else's. I just found the conversation really, really interesting. And here's what they had to say.
I mean, blimey, where do you even begin with what's happening in America right now? Hello, Simon.
Hello, Nick. I thought everything was supposed to change at midnight on December the 31st. What happened to that?
Well, I'm sitting here on my sunny uplands. Where are you?
Well, I'm still wading through treacle in Washington, D.C., but Happy New Year to you.
Yeah, and to you. Well, you know, first I was amused, now I'm petrified, because for a while there it seemed like the predictable wailing of a slapped baby, but it's just gone on, and there's no shame. With people who have no shame and who whine as much as he does to get their way, quite often they do just that. Get their way. This is the basis of his entire life, to just complain and complain and complain and have no shame in doing it. And so at first I just thought it was another of his grifts, something to a way to get more money. And right enough, he has made hundreds of millions of pounds because his dingling fans keep sending him checks. But now it appears that he's co-opted a brunt of the Republican Party to actually stage a coup.
Yeah, well, I think that's absolutely right. You know, I was talking to a former top Republican official yesterday who served in the administration of President George W. Bush at a pretty senior level, and he was saying that he felt that what had occurred over the last 6 or 7 weeks was that Donald Trump had himself made a bit of a journey that started out exactly as you described it, as an attempt basically to raise a bit of money and ensure that he had political relevance going forward after he leaves the White House. But over the last few weeks, he appears, according to this former Republican official, absolutely to have convinced himself that genuinely the election was stolen from him and that he won a landslide victory. And that is certainly borne out by this absolutely jaw-dropping audio tape that was leaked to the Washington Post a few hours ago, an hour-long recording of a conversation between President Trump and Republican officials in Georgia that took place only yesterday, in which Donald Trump, and you can hear him here berating Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, the man who organized the election in Georgia back in November, berating him and insisting that Georgia's Republican officials were wrong in declaring Joe Biden the winner of the state because Donald Trump says he won it.
We have won this election in Georgia based on all of this. And there's nothing wrong with saying that, Brad. You know, I mean, having a correct... the people of Georgia are angry. The people of the country are angry. And there's nothing wrong with saying that, you know, that you've recalculated.
Well, Mr. President, the challenge that you have is the data you have is wrong.
Now, throughout this conversation, Brad Raffensperger, again, the Republican Secretary of State in Georgia, and the state's legal counsel try to reason with the president, insisting that he's provided no proof, now in more than 60 courts across the country, to stand up his false claims that the election was rigged. At one point, Mr. Raffensperger says to President Trump, look, you've got to understand, people can say anything on social social media, the fact that you read these things on social media doesn't necessarily mean they're true. And that elicits this response from the president.
No, this isn't social media. This is Trump media. It's not social media. It's really not. It's not social media. I don't care about social media. I couldn't care less. Social media is big tech. Big tech is on your side, you know. I don't even know why you have a side, because you should want to have an accurate election. And you're a Republican.
We believe that we do have an accurate election.
No, you don't. No, you don't. You don't have. Not even close. They are shredding ballots, in my opinion, based on what I've heard. And they are removing machinery, and they're moving it as fast as they can, both of which are criminal fines, and you can't let it happen, and you are letting it happen. You know, I mean, I'm notifying you that you're letting it happen. So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state.
Now, there is no innocent interpretation that you can put on that conversation. The president is putting the arm on Republican officials in Georgia to help him mount a coup that would stop Joe Biden from being sworn in as president on January the 20th at high noon. The Republican officials, as they've done for many weeks now, are trying to hold the president off, insisting that he's talking nonsense, as we know is true, because his lawyers haven't been able to prove his claims in any court in the land where they have presented them. And again, this conversation took place on Saturday. This isn't something that happened 7 or 8 weeks ago. This happened yesterday. Tonight here, in a joint editorial published in the Washington Post, 10 former defense secretaries, including 2 that were appointed by Donald Trump, General Jim Mattis and Mark Esper, both of them former defense secretaries in Donald Trump's cabinet, have published an opinion piece in the Washington Post warning about the dangers of the path that Donald Trump is on, saying that any effort to involve the military in blocking Joe Biden from becoming president of the United States, and this is a quote, would take us into dangerous, unlawful and unconstitutional territory. This op-ed was apparently the idea of former Vice President Dick Cheney, no shrinking violet liberal, former Vice President to George W. Bush, and at the time considered the Prince of Darkness here in Washington, D.C. He is so disturbed by talk in the last few days that Donald Trump may try to use the Insurrection Act to deploy troops on American streets all over the country, that these 10 defense secretaries have come together and published this article tonight in the Washington Post. We are in absolutely uncharted waters here at the beginning of a week that is supposed to see a joint session of Congress affirm Joe Biden as the president-elect.
Yeah, but the problem with believing in a conspiracy theory is that any evidence that comes to the contrary just indicates that the person that is giving you that evidence is part of the conspiracy.
100%. We saw Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, one of the 11 Republican senators on Capitol Hill who are threatening to try and derail the affirmation of the election results this week, asked on television today why he was pushing for a committee of investigation into non-existent election fraud, as opposed, for example, to be launching a probe of whether the moon landing actually happened or whether 9/11 might have been an inside job. Conspiracy theories that many Americans espouse even to this day. And Senator Johnson said, well, it was all a matter of priorities. I mean, I think what we're learning is that the 11 Republicans who are now, really out there politically. I mean, when Lindsey Graham, the senator from South Carolina, isn't willing to clamber aboard your bandwagon, you've got to know that the bandwagon is rolling down some pretty dead-end railway tracks. I think what we're seeing clearly is that those Republican senators are looking at, let's say, 40 or 50 million of Donald Trump's 75 million voters, and seeing millions of Americans who don't want truth over lies, as Joe Biden's election campaign signs called for. They're actually perfectly happy to settle for lies over truth. And so some of these politicians, worried about the future of their own political hides, are saying, well, maybe we shouldn't be anchored to the truth. Maybe we should actually go over to the dark side and be anchored to lies, because at least that way we'll be returned to office and we'll continue to enjoy our clubby positions of patronage here in Washington, D.C., and open doors to the best steakhouses in the city. I mean, this is a moment of potential schism within the Republican Party between those people wandering down Donald Trump's absolutely blind, unproven, false alley, dominated as it is by claims of election fraud, and those more sentient Republicans up on Capitol Hill who say, hang on, we really can't allow this man completely to hijack our political party. And I think it's a really open question tonight as we begin this year, whether by the end of it, I mean, even maybe by the middle of it, the Republican Party is still a unitary political force in this country.
Yeah, but the problem with relying on people accepting the truth is that we've stepped over that Rubicon years ago when that woman, Kellyanne Conway,
alternative facts,
talked about we have alternative facts. And I think the Republican Party has ceased to be. It is now the Donald Trump Party, which seems to be getting more unhinged by the day. Now officials who believe in the QAnon conspiracy have been elected to positions of authority in American politics.
Yeah, there's no question that I think the story of 2021 is whether the Republican Party can survive this or whether it is split asunder as a result of what Donald Trump has done here over the last 4 years. Mainstreaming extremist and indeed absurd conspiratorial viewpoints that used to exist only in the darkest corners of the internet, refusing to condemn the actions of white supremacist and other extremist groups. We're going to undoubtedly have the Proud Boys back on the streets of Washington on Wednesday. Remember, this is a president who has called his supporters to come to Washington on Wednesday to engage in a show of support as Congress begins its duty in terms of affirming these presidential election results. I mean, I thought the story of the next 4 years that we'd be covering here was whether the Republican Party could survive Donald Trump or whether those moderates who had already kind of cut ties with Donald Trump, people like the Lincoln Project, Kellyanne Conway's husband, in fact, George Conway, who's one of the heads of it, and more sentient Republican figures up on Capitol Hill, Mitt Romney of Utah, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, and others, whether they may end up forming the core of a kind of post-Trump Republican Party, whereas the Trump supporters all split off and, you know, maybe he creates a political party called America First and goes third party and takes his supporters with him. I thought we were going to chart that over the next 4 years on the basis of what's happened here this weekend, the release of this tape, and prior to it, this extraordinary move by Ted Cruz to peel 11 Republicans off from the rest of the caucus and say we're going to challenge the outcome of the election, suggests we might see the splitting up of the Republican Party over the next 4 weeks.
It's just mind-boggling what's happening. If you just pause for a moment and think about what is actually going on here, a clown off the telly who is a serial failure at business, whose only success is to convince other people by playing a man who is successful at business on TV that that's who he is, walked in and took over the world's most powerful and richest political party, and then did the same to the world's most powerful and rich country. And he seems to be now on the verge of becoming one of those people that we will in future be looking at on the History Channel. There doesn't seem to be, when you have no shame and you just continue to bowl forwards and you have the support of, 50, 80 million people in your country who are way more vociferous in their support than the opposition. I mean, his fans love him a lot more than Joe Biden's fans do, there's no doubt about that, then really all you need is a highly motivated third of the population, and you can take over a country.
Yeah, and politically, you give this bloke an inch and he takes a mile. I was looking it up earlier today. It was only on November the 10th, when President Trump was still refusing to accept the outcome of the election, that an unnamed top Republican official on Capitol Hill was saying to the Washington Post, well, what's the downside in humouring him for a few days while he emotionally comes to terms with his defeat?
Yes.
Give him a few days and he'll come round to accepting that he's lost, and he'll hew to tradition, and he'll make the phone call to Joe Biden and congratulate him. That was never on the cards with this president, and the more the inconceivable keeps becoming the absolutely inevitable. It was inconceivable 3 weeks ago that any members of the US Senate were going to try and stop Joe Biden from formally being declared the president-elect of the United States later this week. Inconceivable. Yeah, some of the rowdier members of the House of Representatives, Republicans there, might do it, but members of the Senate, they all took themselves far more seriously than that. So inconceivable, in fact, that Mitch McConnell, the Republicans' leader in the Senate, bailed on President Trump and congratulated Joe Biden on becoming president-elect. And yet here we are 3 weeks later, and the coup, and it is an attempt to carry out a coup here. This is sedition being carried out by the president's enablers on Capitol Hill, and you hear it very clearly in that phone call that we just listened to, has moved further down the field of battle. And I think, you know, what happens here the rest of this week and in the 17 days, 16 days there now, that we've got left of the Trump presidency, I think absolutely anything could happen here.
Doesn't get boring, does it?
Never does, Nick.
Thanks a lot, Simon. That's Simon Marks, LBC's US correspondent, joining me from Washington, D.C.
Well, there were two interesting things that stood out for me, apart from the fact that this was clearly a coup he was trying to stage. But when Nick said that at first he found Trump an amusement, but now someone who is quite scary, I was a little bit the same myself, until I got that very same feeling not long after he was elected, and he had those big books basically saying, I'm not making any money out of my businesses, in full view of the press, and was calling them fake news. I found that quite disturbing. It seemed very Nazi-esque to me. No, I'm not saying he's as bad as Hitler. That's not what I'm saying. But the tactic to make the free press the enemy of the people seemed like something the Nazis would have done in my eyes. So what Nick said really struck a chord with me. Then Simon Marks talked about the Republicans saying we should just let him whine for a few days and he'll come round and concede. Well, it's never on the cards, was it? People like Trump or thin-skinned will never concede because Nick is right. He has no shame. He's like that hungry crocodile who's had a lump of meat thrown his way. They always want more and more and will take an absolute country mile if given an inch. And clearly with his hour-long whine and crying he has no intentions of giving up and will quite happily burn and destroy the Republican Party and democracy in a desperate attempt to steal the election, and clearly he's only interested in what's best for Donald Trump. Right, I shall leave the video here. Again, sorry for another Nick Abbot clip. This will be the last one for a while, unless he gets another call from Brian from Stockton-on-Tees, or Mr. Tampon Taxman, or Donald Trump's #1 fan again. This will be the last one. Right, I shall bid you farewell until the next time. Bye for now, and stay safe. And in these really difficult times, be there for each other, and family and friends. Oh, by the way, thank you for all your kind comments and support. They're all very much appreciated, and I'm very much eternally grateful. So until the next time, bye for now.